Monday we are having our hotkey test. Okay, so I wanted to go through these so that you can see what some of these things do. We've talked about them a little bit as we've worked, but just to get a better idea as we're working, now that you have some experience in what they're going to be doing. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to hit the ones that are kind of the highlight ones, and some of these should be pretty obvious. New scene, Control N, Control O, Control S, Control Shift S. Those should be like everything that you're always doing. Every single program uses those main hotkeys. There's one program, I can't remember what it is. Control Shift S is not safe. It's probably Maya, something else. And then Control D is your project settings, which is kind of weird, but whatever. Okay, so when you hit this, it'll open up project settings down here on the bottom. And so this is where you can specify things like my frames per second, your start times, your end times, different parameters. Typically, you don't need to play with anything inside here, except for maybe this frames per second. In this class, we don't need to worry about it at all. But if you get a project and they're working on something at 24 or 60 or whatever, you may need to play with those functions to change that. And the reason for that is when I hit the play button, this is trying to play back at 30 frames a second. Okay? If I set this to 120, oops, it automatically scaled everything, so let me just move my stuff. So I'm putting this keyframe back to 90. There we go. So that was basically 1 second right there. Now it can't play it back as fast as 120. So that still feels like it's still the same amount of time, but that's what it is. Okay. I'm just going to undo that so I get it back to where it was. Okay. The other thing you might want to be aware of is the scale. All right. As you get into creating something that is more realistic, scale will play a role. In this class, we are not going to get into that too much, but just so you're aware of it, we're kind of arbitrarily building things. If I wanted to build something that looked more realistic and interacted with the lighting and the textures and everything else more realistically, I'd want to build it to an actual scale. We're dealing in centimeters, so this chair may only be like this big. So when I have a light here, that light's going to interact different than if it was a full-size chair with a regular real light, okay? So that kind of stuff is important to pay attention to when we get into photorealistic stuff. But that's your render settings, or your project settings. So search bar, Control F. So if you have a bunch of items here, you can hit Control F and you can find them. Camera. Okay? Typically, not a huge deal, but if you have something grouped inside a group, inside a group, inside a group, it's a good way to find it. The only way you're going to find it, though, is if you actually name stuff. That helps. Okay. So that is something you definitely want to be using. This is a different one. I'm not sure why. Control G is probably used for something. But Alt G is your grouper. Okay? So Alt G is your grouping one. So when you have stuff here, I'm going to close my search bar. I can grab stuff and hit Alt G, and it groups stuff together. All right? And then you can rename it light. Okay. Every time you group something, it's going to be, it puts it into a null. So basically what happens is it makes this null, which is an empty object, and it just drops things inside that folder. Okay. Now you can make your own groups or your own items. Like let's say that this desk had like 50 items on top of it. Okay. So I'm just going to grab the chair, and I'm going to shrink it down by holding Control to duplicate it. Get me out of this camera. There we go. And I'm going to scale it down. So this is a mini toy chair that's on the desk. Whoops. All right. So there's my tiny chair on the desk. Now let's say that every time I wanted to take that desk and move it, I wanted the chair to come along with it. I could group the desk and the chair together. That's a possibility to do. The other thing that I could do is find out where the desk is. So it's right here, and I'll call this desk. I'll call that mini chair. I could take the mini chair and I can drop it onto the desk. Now you see the difference in arrows? Look at this arrow here and that arrow there. Do you see how it's changing? Okay. The down arrow means put it inside of that group. Okay, so when I put the down arrow, it puts it inside the desk. So now when I select the desk and move it, that chair is automatically going to go with that desk, okay, without having an extra group. That's called parenting. The arrow basically just puts it in that order. So I can have my object groups here in a specific order. So I can say I want to move the desk, move the bookcase up here. That's a good spot for it. I want to move the basic chair up here. That's a good spot for that. And organize it that way, okay? But Alt-G is very handy for grouping a bunch of items together. A good way to keep yourself organized. Expanding object groups is Shift-G. So if we grouped our lights and we hit Shift-G, you'll see that it pulls those items out of the group. It doesn't expand as a horrible name, but that's what they call it. Expanding is typically like showing it, but this actually like pulls them out of it. I still have my light group, but now I have these items that are separated. Again, something that when you get into more advanced stuff, you'll see the use for that, okay? New object as parent, Alt create. So if I, where's an item? Let's make a cube. That's perfect. So if I take this cube and I Alt click on this thing, remember we did that before? I took that square object and I made it round like that. That's what that is doing. Okay, Alt clicking it, it makes a subdivision surface, and then it drops that cube into that subdivision surface item. Okay, I'll click on it without holding Alt, and you'll see how it just drops it here. And then I could drag the cube into it, and now it's rounded. Okay, so holding Alt and then doing that item will just automatically create that relationship. The other one, Shift Create, does it the opposite way. So instead of the new item being the parent, the new item will then be the child of it, okay? So see how this is the parent, because I can grab that and move it around and they both move. But if I click on the child, oh, that's a bad example, hold on. Get a better example. So this one, which software are we in today? There we go, okay. So I'm gonna take number 3 and drop it into here, number 4 and drop it into there, number 5, drop it into there. Okay, so number 1 is the parent. He's like the great grandpa. Yes, great grandpa. So this is the great grandpa. I grab the great grandpa and move him around, and everyone in the family moves. If I go to grandpa and I move him around, great grandpa doesn't have to move. It's a butterfly effect. If I go to number 4, which is dad, and I move him around, him and the kid move. If I go to number 5, which is just the kid, just he's moving. Okay? So that structure there is important because certain items inside of Cinema need it to be the parent or it to be the child. Okay? So that's what the other one is going to do. I'm going to grab a cube. I'm going to add a bunch of divisions this way. I don't know why I keep turning. That's not off. Oh, they're just super tight. Look at that. Right. Squeeze that in there. Squeeze it in there. Cool. All right. So Alt clicking this. The new item is the parent. My old item that I had selected is now the child. Smooths it out. Pretty sweet. The other one, which is the Shift Create, I'm going to go into here and click that one with holding Shift. And what happens is that new item is now the child of what I just created. Okay? Now again, these are just quick ways to do it without having to drag stuff around. Now what this does, this is a bend and it has to be the child of it, so that when I go to strength, see how I can bend that right there? Now if the order was separate or was different, if the bend was on top and the cube was underneath it, it wouldn't work. Okay? So that order, that relationship is important. So make sure that if something isn't working, you have that correct. Okay? These are the hotkeys to get there easier. But obviously we can just move stuff in the correct spot. If this isn't in the right spot, I could put it in the right spot. That's not the right spot, it didn't work. There we go, that worked. Okay. Make editable C, you've seen that. Mirror is M. I go here. Oh, Why aren't you working, mirror? I will figure that one out. That's weird. That should be working. Alright, we'll figure that one out. Just ignore that one for now. Duplicating you've seen. Undo and redo are the same. Control Z, Control Y. These ones are specific to the picture viewer. So when we view this, I'm going to turn off my animation. Oops, that's where I do it. Right here, frame. There we go. Okay. Let me grab this. Alright, so Shift R, I can see my image. Gorgeous. And then I'm going to change the color on something just so we can see what's going to happen. Wrong program again. I'm going to drop this pink on here. Cool. And hit Shift R again. Alright, so now I have this image and this image. Okay, so you see I have these two images here. I can hit A on this one, hit B on this one, and then I'll get this little slider so I can compare and contrast what it looked like before and what it looks like now. Sometimes your changes will be very subtle, where you're like, I'm not sure if that did anything, until you see them side by side, okay, or something like this. Very handy. You can change those settings up here too, so just having that on or off, and then showing the text so you can see which one's A and B. This is the way to set them. This is where you can swap them where they're at. This is where you can do a difference. So like what is the different item between the two, which is kind of handy. This is swapping them, the line, so it's a different order. Okay, so very handy tool to be able to do. Swap is S, obviously, spacebar. Control R is render. Play forward is F8. So After Effects, it's spacebar, right? And stupid cinema, it's F8. I can't hit F8 because that's a hotkey on my other thing, but you can see the hotkey for that button is F8. Stopping is F7. Go to the start of the animation, which will jump you back to here. Going to the end will jump you to the other side. Previous keyframe, Control F. Next key is Control G, and so on. Okay, so you'll see what those do. We've played with all of these, except for these ones here. So before, what we've done is we've middle-clicked out of one view and middle-clicked into the new view. These F1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is a great way to be able to jump between those. Okay, so again, I think my software is using some of these, but like F2, I can click on F3, F4, and you can see how I can click and jump between all these different views very quickly instead of jumping out and jumping back in. Framing selected, we've talked about that one. Framing all is H. Here's our transforming hotkeys. Okay. Moving the axis. I don't think we talked about that one yet. Typically, people accidentally hit the button and they don't know what's going on. So if I accidentally hit the hotkey for moving the axis, and I want to move the chair, you see how it's not moving? Okay. What I'm doing is moving the pivot point of that specific item. And typically what I do when I model something is I'll put the pivot at the bottom of it. Oops, it's the wrong one. So here's my chair, and you'll see it's floating. So I'm going to put the pivot right here at the bottom of that chair. I'm going to hit L to get out of pivot mode, and just drag that down. Now the reason I put it at the bottom is because let's say I needed to move the chair like this, and then I need to scale it. When I go to my scale tool and I scale it, it scales it from the bottom. Okay? If it was in the center, it scales it out from the center, then I have to move my chair again to get it lined up with the floor. Right? So it's always best to do it at the bottom like that. Some items we'll get into when we do our other stuff, that pivot has to be right at the center, so when we do mirror it over to that side, it automatically will mirror correctly. And snapping items. So if I hit Shift S down here, this is enabling snap. These are all the different kinds of snap that you can have. So you can snap your objects to vertices, edges, polygons, even your grid that you have, you can snap items to that as well. Okay? You hit Shift S just to toggle it on. Now you can do, for rotating and stuff, some of that works too. You hold Shift and it'll snap every 10 degrees, which is awesome. Same thing this way. Okay, that's not in there, it's just bonus. There are some sculpting things that eventually we'll get into. We don't need to worry about those now, but still remember those hotkeys. So that's all the hotkeys that are on there. Now some extra ones that could be on there is spacebar. Okay, so spacebar is a very cool tool because what happens is it's basically a toggle back to the this tool that we're on. Okay, so if I'm trying to grab points and move them on here, I'm going to hit enter. That takes me to points down there. Then I'm going to tap the space bar. Now I can, I can't select them on there because it's not an item. Go to the desk. Or actually I'll just do that. There we go. Alright. So now I can select points, tap the space bar again, and now I can move it. Tap the space bar again, I can grab points. Tap the space bar again, and now I can move them. Okay? So it's a very easy way to toggle between the two tools you're working on. If that was your last tool, that works perfect. You could also, if I grab, let's say, these faces here, and I'm in the extrude tool, and I pull that, oops. There we go. And then I tap the space bar, and I grab a face, and I tap the space bar again. See how I'm back into that extrude tool? So I don't have to hit D again or go to that other hotkey. So I can very easily toggle between selecting faces, tap the spacebar again, and extrude out. Oops, that's not extrude. That's extrude. Okay, so spacebar is another handy one, just not on the list of things inside here. Enter key toggles between all these. Sweet. Okay. All right, so that's the hotkey list. Next week I'll go over the definition stuff just so you can see the definitions a little bit more, see some examples of them. I don't like to let you go into it like totally blind. Any questions on that bit?